For yes, PreCure 5 GoGo, Happy Birthday in the Sweets Kingdom, I think I have maybe more feelings on it than I do actual formulated thoughts, so it may be difficult to kind of put some of those into actual words, which may be fine because my cough is still around, so that has been a pain for me. But I enjoyed this movie quite a bit. It was a very fun watch. I've watched it several times since with various different people doing rewatches or, hey, you want to watch a movie? Check this PreCure one out. It's kind of fun. But I liked that the first kind of part of it was a bit more on the silly fun time side. We have set up for a birthday party that's only briefly interrupted. And then we get fun exploring the Sweets Kingdom because Chocola shows up and she's like, hey, you guys want to go to the Sweets Kingdom? And everybody is like, well, yeah, kingdom made of sugar and candy and stuff. Sounds good to me. And we get to see basically the entire cast just kind of goof around and have a fun time for quite a bit of the first little part of the movie before things start to get more serious as the cast gets divided up. It's a little funny that the way they kind of start to figure out something's going wrong is when they're talking to Chocola about her mother, and then also because I guess she's not being as proper polite princess or something as she might normally be. But it is kind of a good way to indicate that something's wrong and that she is not quite acting like her normal self. I do like that they present the queen as having basically just been overtaken by a outright evil gluttony, is eating her own throne room and all of that, and it was kind of fun to see that. It's been a little while, I guess, other than the actual main antagonist of Yes, PreCure 5, it had been a little while since we had an evil witch antagonist type character, which, you know, always a classic for the series. But I did also like that with that, we find out that it wasn't actually her who is evil. She is possessed by a different guy who is the actual evil wizard who is the main antagonist. Mushibon was a twist villain for this film, and I honestly really liked his conclusion. I was fine with the evil queen being the cause of the destruction they found there and wanting to eat her way through her own kingdom regardless of what harm it may cause her people. But I enjoyed that secretly there was an even scarier, eviler wizard behind her who was actually just mind controlling her the whole time. I did think it was a little odd that Chocola herself wasn't part of the mind control. It seems like a bit of an oversight if he had control over the queen to not have control over the princess also, unless for some reason she was the only one that Mushibon could actually get his magic control over, which we know isn't the case because once things actually get serious in the movie, he gets control over another character. And he could have control over two other minor antagonists for this film. It's really not very clear what their deal is other than they are evil, and then we see them and they are fine at the end of the film. But I think in the earlier stages of it, it's just a lot of fun, and then things get serious, and then they take it serious for pretty much the rest of the film until they're having a nice little fun party at the end. There's one particular moment of comedy that I think is very understated because it is directly following a very serious, dramatic moment when they are trying to escape the castle and Dream is trying to get to Chocola, who gets thrown into a river, and then she jumps in the river after her, and then they both end up being found by some of the citizens who are just kind of running their normal day-to-day, operating the Willy Wonka looking river, and then just bodies start floating up dead in the water from where normally it should just be a clean river. It was really funny. I know it wasn't fully, maybe it was fully intending to be, maybe it wasn't. It's a little hard to tell because it is, like I said, immediately following a pretty serious moment when they are revealing that things are not as they seem in the Sweets Kingdom. But it was very funny to me seeing that, just them floating dead fish in the water was pretty comedic. And while that was going on, the other PreCures were busy getting separated and beaten up or attacked by the minor antagonists of the film, just so they can keep all the PreCures separated, which, good on Moshiban for actually, like, having that strategy in mind. It's always a pretty good move on the villain's part to keep the incredibly powerful magical girls divided as much as they can, but he didn't divide them enough, because he only managed to get 2 evil underlings to fight 1v2s. But the fights that they had were pretty cool. The PreCures were divided up into pairs. We had, I think, Lemonade and Mint, and then Aqua and Rouge off fighting 2 different villains. And it was a little funny that when they thought that the villains were still good guys, they had animal ears on, I guess because Charcola also did. But then when they reveal their villainy, they take their animal ears off. But that's the only change that they make. They're still just kind of guys. Which, I don't know. There's something very funny about that. And I think those 2, Dry and Bitter, are they weren't very well conveyed as to whether they were working with Mushiban of their own free will, or if they were possessed by evil magic to work with him. Because when we see them at the end, they are just kind of hanging out with everyone, and they're working still as basically assistants to the throne, because they are serving food and drinks at this little party that they're all having. But they aren't even, like, pointed out. They are just kind of walking around in the background, which I thought was a little odd. These guys were just beating the ever-loving hell out of everyone's favorite magical girls, and there's not so much of a glance in their direction or a throwaway comment saying, like, hey, weren't we just beating up and then beating up those guys? Shouldn't they, like, not be invited? Or should they be, like, resting because we did, at the end of our fights, absolutely demolish them? Which that might have been funny for someone more along the line of Rouge or Lemonade, because of her confidence or lack of thoughts in her head, making some comment about that. But maybe that would have been a little too on the nose, a little too rude of them. Who knows? I think it would have been funny if they did, but that's not the point of it. But the fights that they had were really fun. They were very action-packed fights, and I really liked seeing that the action in this film was pretty top-notch throughout a lot of it, including a little ways after escaping the castle, a fight between Dream and a dude that is definitely just, like, almost entirely ripping off Tuxedo Mask's whole beat, but is just Coco, who is also possessed by Mushiban, which is part of why we know he can possess multiple people or mind control multiple people, which is still a little wild that it's not clear if he was actually mind controlling Bitter or Dry or not. I think we have to assume he was, but it's just, I didn't think it was shown very clearly. But the fight between Dream and Coco was actually pretty intense, and I also really liked how well this movie depicted the growth of their relationship over the previous, mostly 2 seasons. And they did so while giving them privacy, because they were alone for their fight, where they were gliding on top of a lake, which was also just a very cool setting for the fight, and pretty high stakes moment together. Coco is under the control of Mushibon, pretty actively trying to kill Dream, who is defending herself adequately, but isn't trying to make any heavy strikes against him because she doesn't want to hurt him, even though if she wanted to, she probably could wipe the floor with this scrawny nerd. He's still a prince, or I guess technically king in this season, but she could probably wreck his entire shop if she really wanted to. But I think this movie does a lot to actually show that Dream and Coco have a relationship that goes beyond just being friends, because they actually address it in this film, and they actually have moments of tension regarding that, and their love for one another being how Coco manages to break free of the mind control he is under, which makes Mushibon absolutely lose his shit and actually reveal himself rather than staying hiding in his wizard chamber wherever he might be. But I'm not like super into their ship, but I liked that the film actually bothered to show that they had a romantic feeling for each other, because most of the rest of the season doesn't. And so it was pretty cool seeing that they bothered to address it here. And I was reading the wiki a little bit before, and it's wild that this is the first on-screen depicted kiss in PreCure. Pretty crazy stuff. I wonder. I kind of have to wonder how that would go over in a theater in 2008. It probably wasn't anything big, but it would have been kind of cool to see how crowds would have reacted to that and see the sort of response to it. But the fights in this film continued to be really good as it went into the finale of the film. All the PreCure beat their own fights, while Nozomi is off fighting Coco. Milky Rose is also getting her own really cool fight, because she ends up back in the throne room and is holding off Mushibon for a while. And while the other fights were very cool and a little bit more martial arts coded, or sword duel of the fates coded with Nozomi and Dream, Milky Rose and Mushibon were just kind of having a Dragon Ball Z slugfest in the throne room. They were jumping off of pillars and throwing themselves into the air and having like fist clashes where it was just explosion of raw energy as they were wailing on each other or as their fists were colliding. It was really cool because I really liked getting to see that. Whereas the other girls are a little bit more focused in how they are fighting or how they convey themselves. Very much like her kind of abrasive personality, Milky Rose just kind of throws herself into it and then starts throwing hands into it too. And it was really fun seeing that. And to his credit, this evil wizard is throwing fists back with the teenage girl. Which then leads a little bit later into another really cool fight. Like, it's just nonstop cool fights at the end of this film, because once they get to the top of the kingdom, Mushibon has a fight with Dream, and she gets to use her actual sword as a sword even more, which is so cool that they've, finally actually did that instead of just using them to shoot a big beam attack. I really liked that part of it especially. And it was a really well shot final fight on top of the castle, especially once they powered up Dream's abilities, I guess, in her whole form. It was shockingly serious at times, and I really liked Dream's power up. Yeah, in my notes, I called her Heaven Ascension Dream, but I know it's just Shining Dream, which is also still just a really fun name. Their whole fight was really cool and very dramatic, and I liked that Shining Dream turned into pure light and killed a man at the end of their dramatic sword duel. I think it's really kind of wild that she straight up murked that dude. But then they also didn't murk the guys who were working for him, because they kind of blew them up, but they were fine, as we saw at the end of the film. And like I said earlier, I don't think they did a very good job of conveying if they were actually mind controlled or not. But the fact that they blow up Mushiban, and he kind of gets not a redemption, but I've seen the error of my ways, I understand why I've been beaten type energy right at the very end, before he disintegrates, because Nozomi has turned into light and flown directly through him in a very dramatic conclusion. But then they all get their fun little birthday party that they were wanting to do anyway, and the queen is no longer possessed, and Chocola is happy because her mother is no longer possessed by an evil wizard. And all is right in the Sweets Kingdom at the end. Let's go, the PreCure do it once again. I really liked this movie a lot. It was a very fun watch. I think it's a fun one that even people who aren't like super into PreCure can get into, just because we do get a little bit of each of their personalities. And it's a little harder because we have kind of a larger cast for this one, because Coco is also actively doing things, and we have Chocola and the other side characters also actually doing things. And the addition of Milky Rose means we have 6 PreCure to contend with. But I don't know, somebody is just kind of in for a ride that they may or may not fully comprehend. I think it's a fun watch, even without knowledge of PreCure. But with it, it's a very fun watch. I really enjoyed this movie. I genuinely think it might be a 10 out of 10 film. But it's a lot of fun, and I had a lot of fun watching it.